All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus.
Yeah,
So, from what I understand, this is a kind of an exploration of the relationship between language and reality.
definitely.
And it does so through kind of a unique style.
Yeah, it's written in these kind of numbered propositions. It's very structured.
Right, and it's interesting because it's coming out of, World War I, like a really tumultuous time.
It kind of makes you wonder if that search for clarity, like in the middle of all that chaos,
Yeah.
do you think that maybe that influenced his thinking at all?
I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I think that, when you're surrounded by so much, like uncertainty and chaos, you kind
Yeah.
of naturally just want to like grab onto something that feels solid and certain.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And so I think that this work is really his attempt to kind of like find that like bedrock of certainty.
And what's really interesting, too, is that his later work actually ends up being very different from the Tractatus.
Right.
So this is kind of a really unique moment in his philosophical development.
Okay, so our mission today is to try to like make sense of the core arguments
Right.
of this really influential work and to kind of see how it's had a lasting impact.
Yeah,
And we're going to try to do that without getting too bogged down
right.
in like the super academic details.
Yeah, we want to make this accessible,
Right, exactly.
for everyone.
So one of the things that really struck me about the Tractatus
Yeah.
is this idea that the world isn't just like a bunch of things, right?
Yeah. It's not just like a table and a chair and a book.
Right, it's not just objects, it's more like the totality of facts.
Exactly. And
Oh.
so that's one of the central claims of the Tractatus, that the world is the totality of facts, not things.
And so then language, like
Yeah.
what's the purpose of language in all of this?
Well, he says that the primary function of language is to picture these facts. So it's like language is trying to create a representation of the world as it is.
Okay, so I can kind of see how a statement like the book is on the table
Yeah.
is like a picture of that situation in the real world.
Right, exactly. Like you're creating this little image
Right.
with words.
But where does this break down? Like, are there limits to language's ability to kind of mirror reality like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the Tractatus argues that, yes, there are definite limits. It really comes down to the idea that language is fundamentally equipped to deal with matters of fact.
Right.
But when we go beyond that, so when we start talking about things like ethics
Mm-hmm.
or metaphysics, or we're trying to express values,
Right.
or talk about the nature of existence itself.
That's the really big questions.
The really big questions, exactly.
Yeah.
The Tractatus says we run into what he calls the unsayable. Like language just isn't designed to handle that stuff.
Okay, so there's a difference then between what can be said, which is like facts,
Yes.
and then what can only be shown.
Exactly.
So what exactly do you mean by like shown versus said?
Okay, so saying, that involves making these meaningful statements about the world.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the cat is on the mat, a proposition that has a truth value.
Right.
But showing, that refers to aspects of reality and also aspects of the structure of language itself,
Okay.
that they can't be directly stated, but they're kind of like exhibited, they're revealed
Right.
indirectly. So things like logic,
Uh-huh.
ethics, aesthetics,
Okay.
these are all things that Wittgenstein says are shown. You can't really like say them.
Yeah, right.
You can't put them into a proposition.
Mm.
And he says if you try to do that, if you try to say what can only be shown, that's when you get nonsense.
And so he says that the Tractatus itself
Oh, yeah.
is ultimately nonsensical.
Yeah, it's kind of this, I don't know, kind of a self-destructing,
Right.
like a ladder that you climb up and then you kick away once you've reached the top.
So like it's a tool to get you to this point,
Yeah.
but then you're supposed to like let go of it. Okay, so the Tractatus is structured around these 7 principal propositions, right?
Yep.
And the first one is like kind of a foundational statement. It says the world is everything that is the case. And so you're kind of already seeing this emphasis on facts.
Absolutely. And then Proposition 2 builds on that.
Okay.
So Proposition 2 says, what is the case? The fact is the existence of atomic facts.
Okay.
So here he's introducing this idea that like these complex facts that we see in the world,
Right.
they're actually built up from simpler facts, these atomic facts.
Okay, so you've got the world, the facts, and then Proposition 4 brings in thought and language.
Right. Proposition 4 says the thought is the significant proposition.
Right.
So here he's saying that thought itself is structured in the same way that the world is.
Mm.
So our thoughts are also these propositions.
And then probably the most famous proposition is Proposition 7.
Oh yeah, the big one. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent.
So, like, don't even try to talk
Don't even
about
try. It's just going to be nonsense.
those things that can only be shown.
Right. And then underpinning these propositions are these key concepts that are kind of woven throughout the work.
Okay.
So you have things like logical atomism, which is the idea that the world can be broken down into these simple, independent elements. And you see this influence from Bertrand Russell, who was a big proponent of logical atomism.
And Wittgenstein kind of like adopted that view.
Yeah, for a time, early on. But interesting, he actually later moved away from it.
Okay. And then there's this picture theory of meaning.
Yes, the picture theory of meaning. And this is where he's saying that propositions, they function like pictures of reality. They're sharing a logical structure with the facts that they represent. So the words in a proposition, they act like names for objects in the world.
Right.
But there's this catch. He says the logical form itself. So the way that these things are connected, that can't be pictured. It can only be shown.
Okay, so ethics.
Yeah.
If ethics is trying to state values as facts,
Right.
what are the implications of that?
Well, the Tractatus says that ethical statements, they're not really factual propositions.
Right.
And so they belong to this realm of the unsayable.
So it's not something that you can,
You can't verify it. It's not true or false.
right.
It's something else. And he says that ethics is really more like an orientation that's shown through our actions,
Okay.
not something that we can articulate through statements.
And metaphysics is in the same boat.
Yeah, because metaphysics is trying to grasp at what lies beyond the world of facts.
Right.
And the Tractatus says that's a misunderstanding of what language can do.
Okay, so this book obviously had a pretty big impact on philosophy.
Oh, yeah, it was huge, like really influential. It had a huge impact on logical positivism
Okay.
and analytic philosophy. But, you know, it's interesting because there were all these different interpretations.
Right.
So you have like the standard reading and the resolute reading, and they have kind of different takes on what Wittgenstein was really getting at. And then you have groups like the Vienna Circle, who were really engaged with the Tractatus. They were trying to apply it to all sorts of different areas of thought.
And it's important to remember that Wittgenstein himself actually kind of moved away from these ideas later on.
Yeah, and his later work, like Philosophical Investigations, he's got a totally different approach.
Right.
To language, he's talking about meaning is use.
Okay.
And these things called language games.
Right.
So it's a pretty significant shift.
So basically the Tractatus is this exploration of language and its limits.
Yeah.
And how it can represent reality.
Yeah.
And then it even like questions its own significance.
Right, like it says, hey, I'm just a tool, use me to see this stuff, but then like, let me go.
So a final thought I'd leave you with is this. Think about how this idea of showing versus saying
Yeah.
plays out in your own life.
Right, how does this apply to you?
So like think about things like art or music.
Or even just like your personal values.
Yeah, like what are the things that you feel like you understand or that you communicate best, not through like explicitly stating them,
Yeah.
but maybe through your actions or what you create.
Or even how you live your life. Like, what
Yeah.
are the things that really matter? Even if you can't put them into words.
Yeah.
That's something to think about.